This is a good one. How would this one go down? I mean, my instinct is to think that NATO might be too much for US civilians. But on the other hand, we're talking about probably over 100 million people in America with multiple firearms. But the issue is NATO, because NATO and the US obviously form that NATO alliance, NATO probably has a really good knowledge of America, the best ways in, the best sort of territories to get. But that's still, it's easier said than done. If you've got all these Americans, like fortifying those areas that NATO would try and get into, they're still going to have to get past those people. How would this go down?
There are about 500 million privately owned firearms in the United States.
Wow.
And this time, they're not facing one army. They're facing every country in NATO except the US all at once. Why the alliance turns on its founding member doesn't matter here. We're going full sandbox. The US government and military are switched off completely. So the only people defending the country are civilians who already legally own a gun. One more rule. The UK and France both have nuclear weapons. For this scenario, they stay locked up. Let's go. The Defenders.
Yeah, I think that's fair. No nukes.
Out of 107 million gun owners, even if just a fraction show up, that's already more people than NATO's entire invading force.
Wow.
They organize the way informal militias always have. Small local groups. Somebody actually in charge of each one, built on gun clubs, hunting groups, and veteran networks that already know each other. A lot of these people aren't strangers to a fight either. There are around 18 million US veterans, and close to half of them own a gun. That's 8 to 9 million people who already know how to move, shoot, and communicate under pressure. Plus,
I would have thought more of the veterans would own guns. I would have thought it'd be closer to like 90%.
a bunch more who picked it up in law enforcement. Gear-wise, AR-15s, AK pattern rifles, hunting rifles, 50 cals, night vision, body armor, and tens of billions of rounds of ammo already sitting in closets across the country. Last time we did a video like this, people said we lowballed what gun owners actually have. Fair. Most of what's out there is semi-auto. One trigger pull, one shot. But that still leaves thermal scopes, suppressors, and enough 50 cal power to punch through light vehicle armor from over a mile out.
Wow.
On top of that, there's still about 175,000 legally owned, fully automatic weapons out there. Then
Wow.
there's the heavier stuff. Surplus M113 armored personnel carriers, decommissioned jets.
These are in civilian hands? Like there's people out there, like regular people that own tanks. Are you serious?
And Vietnam-era Huey helicopters show up at collector auctions all the time. Almost
Wow.
always with the weapons taken out. With no government around to stop that here, some of it gets put back together. Gun owners who know machining or maintenance can bring a disabled weapon back to life with enough time and the right parts. Most of it stays broken though, since undoing a proper demill job takes some real skill and time. What people build themselves is a different story. Welded plate steel and homemade gun mounts on trucks and boats. The kind of redneck engineering you'll see at gun shows and prepper expos all over the country. And geography helps. Montana's got the highest rate of gun ownership in the country at 66.3% of households.
That's crazy. I would have put money on Texas being number one.
Wyoming's right behind at 66.2%, and Alaska at 64.5%. Two
Wow.
of those three states are about to matter a lot. The invaders. NATO, without the US, is still enormous. About 2.3 million active troops, more than 2,000 Leopard 2 tanks, and over 20,000 aircraft between them. Turkey brings the alliance's second biggest army behind the US, plus the combat drones, Bayraktar TB2s, and Akinci that tore through armor from Syria to Nagorno-Karabakh. Germany supplies the backbone. Most of those Leopard 2s either roll off German assembly lines or run German doctrine. And Poland's building one of the largest, most modern armies in Europe by mixing them with a huge new order of South Korean K2 tanks. The UK and France are the only two members with real aircraft carriers, the Queen Elizabeth and the Charles de Gaulle. They're also the alliance's two nuclear powers, which is exactly why their warheads are the ones getting locked up for this.
I'm so surprised. I thought Germany would have for sure had nukes. For sure. Or Poland at least. Wow, so it's only France, the US, and the UK that have nukes in NATO.
This one. Canada,
Wow.
the only member that actually touches the US, throws in its own troops in Leopard 2s rather than just hosting everyone else's. Norway and the Netherlands fly F-35s too, though the standard land-based version that can't launch off the carrier deck. The other 23 members fill in the rest. Italian and Spanish Typhoons, Swedish Gripens, Baltic infantry, smaller pieces of a very large machine. On paper, that's every reason this shouldn't be close, but in reality, the fight. Well, almost everything NATO has for moving huge numbers of troops across an ocean fast is American. C-17 Globemasters doing most of the heavy lifting, plus American ships. Take the US out, and you take out the one thing that makes a fast invasion possible. What's left in the air is the Charles de Gaulle's roughly 30 Rafales, and the Queen Elizabeth's roughly 36 F-35Bs, and that's it. Every other NATO jet is stuck on a runway in Europe. A Typhoon's unrefueled combat radius is under 900 miles. A Rafale's is a bit over 1,000, and the US East Coast sits more than 3,500 miles away. Without a captured US base, almost none of NATO's real air force ever reaches this war. So this isn't a flood, it's a trickle, and it only has one real door. Canada is the only NATO country that actually touches the US. Across more than 5,500 miles of border, and its own forces join the invasion instead of just hosting it. The plan? Fly and ship troops into Canada first, since the airports and highways are already there, then drive south. A smaller group lands by sea on the East Coast off those two carriers, aimed at ports near Boston and New York. Heavy vehicles need working cranes and open docks, not just a beach.
But hang on a minute, couldn't NATO use submarines to bring in troops? Like I don't think that NATO relies entirely on the US for moving troops around long distances. I'm sure there's probably enough submarines to get a decent number of troops across, long distances.
And an unarmored crane out in the open is a lot easier to hit than a soldier in a trench. Even the Canada route isn't fast, though. The UK's 1982 task force to the Falklands sailed 8,000 miles and took weeks just to assemble. And the Falklands are smaller than most American towns. D-Day put 156,000 troops ashore on day one and took months to grow past 1 million. Without American lift, NATO's opening wave realistically looks like 100,000 to 150,000 troops, not millions. And that's assuming 31 militaries can actually operate together cleanly, which they never really have. In Afghanistan, some allied governments put limits on what their troops were allowed to do, so commanders couldn't always use every unit the same way. Nobody sane tries to occupy 3.8 million square miles with a couple 100,000 troops anyway.
Yeah, especially if they're up against 107 million armed civilians. We're talking outnumbered 1,000 to 1.
The real goal is smaller. Grab the northern border and a coastal foothold. Dig in, use it as leverage. That puts the first fighting exactly where Montana, Wyoming, and Alaska already lead the country in gun ownership. It's brutal weather up there too, the kind that grounds helicopters and freezes fuel lines. Just a normal Tuesday for the people who live there. None of it happens as a surprise. Commercial satellites already photograph ports and staging areas well enough that a buildup this size gets tracked online weeks before the first ship sails. NATO isn't fighting 107 million people on day one. It's fighting a few 100,000 defenders against 100,000 to 150,000 invaders. On ground, the defenders know cold. NATO wins in the open, so the fight doesn't happen in the open. It happens in the tree line, the mountain passes, the highway crossings any mechanized column has to funnel through. One guy in a pickup with a rifle and a little patience can shut down a bridge crossing for a day. Some of those trucks aren't stock.
But hang on a minute though, even though NATO doesn't have nukes, I'm sure they still have many missiles they can use, like fairly long to short range explosives that the person with the 50 cal, the long range 50 cal, would be identified and probably taken out from a distance. Like with the technology that NATO would have at its disposal, I'm sure any sort of blockades put up by the US civilians would be taken out. This is just obviously for argument's sake. This would never really happen, but I refuse to believe that one civilian with a 50 cal would stop NATO. or would stop, NATO from progressing through that path that is chosen.
Either the welded plate and improvised gun mounts from gun shows and prepper expos show up right here, on exactly the roads they were built for. A 50 cal round is about the size of a cigar and doesn't need to hit a person. Put a hole in a fuel truck or a radio mast and the whole column stops moving. It's close to the same playbook that's chewed through armored columns in Ukraine for years. Cheap drones and small anti-armor teams picking apart a mechanized force stuck on a limited number of routes. Millions of Americans already fly commercial and hobby drones, and that same gear works just as well watching a convoy as it does shooting a wedding. There's no single headquarters to knock out, since a defense built on thousands of local groups doesn't collapse when one leader goes down. NATO's carrier jets can still hurt a large exposed group when they find one. But finding a target that small and mobile without satellite or radar support is its own problem. And every mile south adds to NATO's troubles.
But why wouldn't NATO have satellite support? NATO have satellites up in the air, don't they? NATO have access to drones that they could use, like the Turkish drones that have cameras on them. Some of them, I think.
Fuel, ammo, and replacements all have to cross an ocean and squeeze down the same handful of Canadian roads. Defenders never leave their own supply chain. The verdict: chance of US gun owners repelling the attempted foothold, at least 65%. The one thing that could change this: give NATO a few uninterrupted years to build the lift capacity it's missing, and the math could flip. But that takes years NATO doesn't have here. This is what it can actually pull off right now. And if you want to see the fight where the numbers actually favor the
very interesting. I'm a little bit skeptical though. I don't know. Like I believe most of what was said in this video. My main skepticism is that NATO, the technology that they would have, even without the US, I feel like they would have enough tech to be able to find where large groups of the civilians are and be able to take them out with missiles. Like, I think that's where I think they'd be able to do that with relative ease. Like, especially if they've got ICBMs, like that are highly targeted. Like, I'm sure they'd be able to figure out where the main central hubs of control for the civilians would be and take them out. Like, I don't know why that would be that hard to do. I mean, like, we do it now. Like NATO countries do it now with, enemy targets. Like, they're able to take people out from other countries. I don't know. I feel like that hasn't really been answered unless I missed it, but I don't think I did. I don't know whether it would be, I think the US would still have the advantage, the sheer numbers, if NATO could only bring in 150, 200,000 people on let's say week one, the sheer numbers, we're talking like 500 to 1, like 100 million versus 200,000. We're talking like, that's, I think 500 to 1 or something. It's insane odds. But the civilians, I mean, the civilians would also have a fair amount of tech. They'd have drones, as was said in the video. They'd have, very high powered firearms. Maybe some missiles. I don't think they'd have very many missiles though. Thanks for watching, guys. If you enjoyed the video, please like and subscribe. And if you did, check out this video right here and hit the join button below. See you there.